The state of California believes that more than 300,000 tenants could lose their housing vouchers if they put the new Section 8 limits that limit it to 2 years in place. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of the great state of California, one of the worst places, in my opinion, to be a landlord. Obviously, they have too many rules, too many regulations, too high taxes, they're anti-business. There's 1,000 reasons why I would never, ever own a rental property there. But now, guess what? The landlords there who are taking these Section 8 tenants in, they could be facing huge losses because these tenants are going to lose their vouchers, okay? And this is happening all over the country, but in California, this is particularly bad, especially in places like San Francisco, where there's a large number of these tenants, and guess what? The voucher was covering a good portion of their rent. They won't be able to cover that amount. They won't. Okay, they won't be able to pull enough money to pay those super high rents out of their pockets. It is impossible. Even if they get a job, even if they get 2 jobs, the rents there are just too high. So these landlords are going to be losing a lot of money when they make these cuts. However, I still agree with them. I still believe that yes, these cuts are necessary. I believe that the Section 8 vouchers, they are just not good for people in general, okay? They discourage people from working. They push this socialist system into our country that causes our taxes to go up. And you know what? They become dependent. They become dependent on the government, and we have just this false economy where they can have rent prices this high, where they don't have to have affordable housing because the government is covering the cost of housing. So yeah, I believe that yes, these vouchers, the government covering the cost of people's rent, is part of the reason why rents are so high in places like San Francisco and places like California in general. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So do you believe that these vouchers, the fact that they cover a large portion of the rent for people in very expensive places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego and all over the state of California, do you believe these vouchers are actually part of the reason why rents are so expensive out there, okay? They know they can charge high rents because the voucher is going to be able to cover that cost. Even though in a regular market, right, you would never be able to charge tenants such high rents who make such low incomes because they couldn't pay that amount. Yeah, that's my opinion, okay? But do you agree with me? Put a comment in the comment section down below. Let's get into this article. I'm going to tell you what's going on in California. This article is coming from kqed.org, and it says, thousands of Californians could lose rental assistance amid federal housing cuts. And I've been covering several articles about this very issue going from state to state. I've talked about Atlanta. I've talked about Tulsa, Oklahoma. I've talked about all over the country. Now I'm talking about California. Now, their market is very different than these landlord-friendly places. There are not a lot of places that people can afford if they don't have these vouchers, okay? And what this could end up meaning is that landlords are going to take huge losses, okay, if these vouchers are cut. Landlords are going to take huge losses. But, I mean, it sucks. I still think it's good for the economy. I would like California to move back to a more market-run economy where the government isn't declaring how much landlords can charge for rent. The government isn't putting all these restrictions on new construction for new housing, and actual affordable housing could be built, but it's very, very unlikely, or it'll take much more than simply Section 8 cuts for that to happen. Okay, so we're going to see some interesting things coming up here pretty soon. Let's get into the article, though. Ray Michelle Vang knows what it's like to start over. The Fresno radio host and single mom of 3 says she wouldn't be where she is today without the federal housing voucher she received nearly 8 years ago. At the time, she was trying to leave an abusive relationship, raising 2 daughters and pregnant with a 3rd. I just thought, what am I going to do? Am I going to go homeless with 3 kids? Vang said. She applied for a voucher on a whim, expecting to wait years. Instead, she was approved in a year. It changed everything. The voucher, which pays 30% of her rent, allowed her to focus on providing for her daughter's needs, diapers, new clothes, and being present. She started taking communications classes at Clovis City College, where she landed the radio hosting job. Vang now hosts a 2-hour daily show on Hmong Radio where she speaks Hmonglish. She covers everything from parenting to voting in local elections. Now, they threw this story out there, right, trying to garner sympathy. Oh, this is, a good example of, why we need these vouchers and why we need... Well, if you pay attention, though, this lady, right, she used the voucher for a temporary period of time until she was able to get back on her feet and then, get her job in radio and move on. And hopefully, now, I don't know, maybe she still uses the voucher. Maybe she still has to get the voucher because I know radio doesn't pay that well. But hopefully that job, if it would have fulfilled the requirements of the work requirement, okay? And if it pays enough, it would allow her to pay the rent without needing the voucher. But even before that, right, she had a place to live for a full year while she was waiting to get this voucher. So she waited a year and then they gave her this voucher. So to me, that's what that's really telling me is that, hey, she didn't need the voucher in the first place. She was getting along just fine without it. Yes, she had to struggle more. Yes, she had probably a smaller place with less amenities. Yeah, she probably had to work more hours, etc. But it's not the government's job to, make it so I don't have to work as many hours at my job and I can live in a bigger place. That's not the purpose of our government, okay? Now, these vouchers, in my opinion, are for just basically you've hit real hard times and we're going to help you out temporarily. And that sounded like her story right there. She hit hard times. They helped her out temporarily. She got off the voucher. She has another job. And now she doesn't need the voucher anymore. So she's actually the argument for my position. Okay? Yet they're sitting here and putting her out there like, oh, no, we can't. These cuts would have hurt. They wouldn't have hurt her. Okay? She would have been fine with or without the voucher. Now, what I have an issue with is these people who are basically on vouchers for life. Okay, they are on voucher. Once you get this voucher, you're on this voucher for 20, 30 years. Never, you're not paid. Like in her case, they only covered 30% of her rent, which means she had to cover the other 70%. Well, there are many cases where they cover 100% of the rent. 100% of the rent, yet we have people who are fully capable of working. And they're on it for 10, 20, 30 years. Ridiculous, okay? And I just do not agree with that. I don't think it's a good idea. I think that it is a huge drain on the economy. I think that it, is too much of a socialist program, and I disagree with it. And you know what? Time for it to end, period. So yeah, these hard luck stories they always throw in these articles are ridiculous. But I'm going to skip down a little bit in here and get out of this lady's personal story. Under pressure from the Trump administration, Congress is proposing sweeping cuts to the Department of Housing and Urban Development's budget and programs. More than 900,000 Californians rely on federal housing assistance, and only 1 in 4 eligible residents currently receive help, according to the California Budget and Policy Center. If Congress doesn't act, we could see tens of thousands of people, including seniors, people with disabilities, and working parents, pushed out of their homes, said Monica DeValos, a housing policy analyst with the California Budget and Policy Center. So one of the scams they always use, right, is they're like, oh, we're going to be kicking people, disabled people with who are elderly out of their homes. Okay, no, we don't plan on doing that. Now, I do have big issue with the current disability system because, in my opinion, disability has replaced welfare, and there's a lot of able-bodied people who now are on disability who in the past would have been on welfare, okay? But they're living off of disability and they are not disabled. Okay, and yet they somehow, it's for my mental. I'm disabled permanently for life. You guys have to pay for me to live for the next 60 years because I have a mental disability, and I believe, yeah, there are cases where that's true, but there's a lot of scamming going on. There's a lot of fraud, a lot of waste, a lot of abuse, and it has gone too far. And how long before we have just this huge, and I mean a much, much bigger number of people who are not working because they know, hey, I can get my government check. Hey, I get my disability every month. You know, I get my Section 8 voucher. I get my food stamps, right? And I don't have to do anything. And I can sit here and I can live in an expensive place like Los Angeles or like San Francisco or some expensive place that I would never be able to afford otherwise. In a nice, you know, maybe they'll build a nice new construction place for me, if 100% subsidized by the government, of course, right? I mean, but this is the reality that we're facing, that these cuts, they're coming. Okay, they're necessary. We cannot put up with this forever. And regardless of what you may see, you know, these hard luck stories or whatever, right? Those are the outliers. The majority of the people on these programs don't need it, period.